right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Why don't you come up sometime, see me?
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
The stuff that dreams are made of.
Hi, Wendy here. Before we start off our episode today, I want to remind everybody to check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Also, please leave a rating or comment on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. You can find us on social media by simply searching Silver Screen Time Machine, and please make sure you follow our podcast, Silver Screen Time Machine, anywhere you get your podcast. Thank you, and enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome again to Silver Screen Time Machine, Wendy's Classic Film Review. Today, we have a twice returning guest. This is the third appearance on Silver Screen Time Machine, one of my personal favorite guests. No offense to all you other guests. I love you all equally, but Ed is just a little bit more my favorite. We have such nice conversations. So Ed, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be back.
So we can do a quick refresher. You can remind everybody what kind of projects you have going on right now. Bear in mind, of course, this will not be aired for another 2 weeks, but feel free to talk about upcoming projects.
Yeah, so always involved with different theater and film projects. Right now, I'm currently in the middle of a run of a Pulitzer Prize winning play, A Buried Child. So that ran last weekend, will run next weekend. So unfortunately, after this podcast will air, but that's okay. And then working on, some short film related stuff, just a couple minor projects here or there. Wendy might even be appearing in one this fall. We're kind of working on. But yeah, that's pretty much it for right now.
And we talked at the last podcast, Vertigo with Dell, about Selah, which you guys produce, Yellow Bridge. I told people, but to go to your YouTube channel and check that out. Really, really good film. So we did mention that in the last one, just a refresher of that. Please go check that out. And also, very exciting news today. This will still be relevant when this podcast is aired, that we are nominated for Best Podcast in Pittsburgh, Silver Screen Time Machine. And you listeners, and all you people listening can go out and you can vote. All you need is your email address. I think they might make you put your first and last name, your birth date or something in the first time you do it. But you can vote, I believe, daily. It is the city paper. And you can go online. They have a Best of Pittsburgh. They have a lot of different categories. But if you search through and you find Best Podcast, you will see Silver Screen Time Machine is there. Please vote for us. Please, please. We want to be the best podcast in Pittsburgh. I mean, anybody listening knows we are. But, let's confirm it. Let's make it official.
Let's go to get the award. I voted today as well already.
Yes,
so,
awesome.
Yeah.
Yay. All right. So anyhow, on to what we're going to talk about today. I'm very excited about this. My pick. Thank you. You're so accommodating to work with my picks. I never get to pick my own films. It's always the guest films.
Hey, it's the gentlemanly thing to do, and also exposes me to some films that might not have been on my radar otherwise, which I'm always up for.
Yeah, and I so rarely get to talk about some of my favorite directors because, like I said, I'm rarely picking the films, and this is one of my personal favorite directors. So we are getting in our time machine, and we are going back to 1933, and we are going to talk about
The Bitter Tea of General Yen.
Yes, this is a very obscure film, I think. And we should probably put a little disclaimer that this is going to be a film of its time. There is some racial stereotyping, I would say. Yeah, it is a little problematic in that regard. You have white people playing Asians. We don't really care for that, but I still think this is a worthy film to watch, and even taking that stuff into account, obviously, and being mindful of that. But still, this is a really beautiful film in its own regard.
Yeah, and you just have to view it from the time.
Yeah.
You can't, unfortunately, look at it from today's lens because, like you said, there was whitewashing and it's very different ideas culturally from now and then, but you can still see it as a time capsule in the form of art.
Yes. So to start off, we usually start off with the Academy Awards nominations. Well, none. So that'll be none. A little weird this particular year. I was wondering about this. I went back and looked. This actually, the Academy Awards that encompass 1933 were actually for 1932 and 33. It started in August of 1932 and went all the way through December 1933. So you have films at the end of 32 that were nominated. So it was a very odd year for Oscars. Also, our director here, Frank Capra, was already nominated for another film, Lady for a Day, so I'm guessing maybe that didn't help The Bitter Tea of General Yen. I mean, the one glaring one that I would say probably should have been nominated for was the art direction, set direction, those beautiful, beautiful sets that they created in this film.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they even used some real authentic antiques from just different historical periods of China just to give it that actual look.
Yeah, I mean, the sets are gorgeous in this, and I really think that's where a nomination would have been probably warranted. I did look to see who did the art direction, but when I looked in the credits, they didn't even have a person for that. They had nobody listed, so I didn't know if it was just the production that did it. I'm not sure. I was confused by that, but I don't know. This film is based on a novel by Grace Zering Stone, the novel The Bitter Tea of General Yen. It was from 1930. She had actually 3 novels made into film: Winter Meeting, this particular novel, and a novel called Escape. She was born in New York City. Her mother died when she was a child. She would go on to marry a Navy Commodore. She wrote this novel while living in China when her husband was commissioned there. The novel is actually more about a philosophical contest between Megan's Christian worldwide view and Yen's elegant, educated, wise, unsentimental philosophy. It's not really so much the whole romantic story that it sort of morphed into. That was more added by the screenwriters. It was basically, I don't think they had any kind of a romantic relationship. It was just Megan and General Yen sort of having this.
It was East versus West,
yeah, correct.
Yeah.
And also another thing, Grace wrote her novel Escape, which was a World War II Nazi type novel under a pseudonym, Ethel Vance, to protect her daughter who was living in occupied Europe during the Nazi regime. And it was obviously the book was kind of against the Nazis, so she didn't want her daughter to be noticed. And Grace lived to be 100 years old.
Wow.
Good for her. Our screenplay by Edward Paramore Jr. I loved the dialogue in this film. As a matter of fact, as I was going through it, I found myself just writing parts of the dialogue in my notes because there were just so many really, really good lines.
There were several really good lines that just kind of struck out at you, even if they weren't objectively good. Like what they said was
not
really
not politically correct.
Yeah,
sometimes,
it was full of hate or anger, like you said, politically incorrect. It's still a really good line, and that also, that kind of struck me. And so there were little instances of that philosophical East versus West.
Yep,
you could see it kind of bled into the script, but you're right. Very much the focal point of this story was the romance.
Right. And I don't know how much of the dialogue came from the book or the screenplay, so I don't know who to credit. But anyhow, Edward Paramore Jr., he started out as a staff writer at Paramount before becoming a freelance screenplay writer. One of his most well-known films, The Three Comrades, he worked with F. Scott Fitzgerald, who was not credited on that particular film. Fitzgerald did not get along with Paramore. During their time working together with MGM, they had to collaborate on several screenplays. In fact, he based a character on Paramore in his novel The Beautiful and the Damned, and from what I understand, it was not a very pleasant character that he based on him. Paramore, as I said, Paramore changed the novel The Bitter Tea of General Yen to add the romantic attraction between Megan and General Yen. An odd thing about Paramore, he died from a skull fracture in a freight elevator accident in a parking garage at age 60. Oh. And I didn't have any further information on that.
That's just weird.
Yes, so I'm not exactly sure what happened. Did the elevator plummet to the ground?
That's what I'm picturing. Yeah, the elevator just broke and plummeted to the ground, and he got hit in the accident. That is...
Yeah. And I'm not 100% sure about it because in one location it said he died in a parking garage and the other location said he died in a freight elevator accident. So I'm not sure. I just put them together.
That's interesting.
Somehow this guy died.
Yeah,
I don't know.
And then,
I don't know why I'm laughing about it either. But anyhow, very sad. Cinematographer Joseph Walker. Okay. I don't know much about Joseph Walker, but boy, this guy has credentials out the wazoo. Wow. It's going to be a while we're going to be talking about this guy. He's got all sorts of patents. This guy is amazing. He was nominated for 3 Oscars, The Jolson Story, Here Comes Mr. Jordan, and You Can't Take It With You, which is another Frank Capra movie. In 1982, he was the first winner of the Gordon Sawyer Award. The Gordon Sawyer Award is an honorary award given by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to, quote, an individual in the motion picture industry whose technological contributions have brought credit to the industry, end quote. He was the first recipient. He had a background in newsreel and documentary camera work during his experience in World War I, filming aerial scenes for the Red Cross. I mean, that's very Frank Capra type thing in his early films, this sort of newsreel documentary feel. And this was Frank Capra's go-to cinematographer guy. He worked with this guy a lot. Now, I'm going to get into all these accreditations that this guy has. So, 1911, he made the first wireless news report using equipment he designed. 1912, he built the first wireless transmitters for airplanes and automobiles. 1913, he made a wireless news report to the Los Angeles Times on the Mexican Revolution. He taught himself the fundamentals of cinematography using a borrowed movie camera. He developed a variable diffusion system, which was bought by the Mitchell Camera Company. He developed a composite printing system that was purchased by the Williams Process Company. He developed the Electra Zoom lens, which was sold to RCA and the Zeiss Optical Corporation. During World War II, he developed a cryptographic and aerial equipment. He designed and built wide-angle lenses for the Todd AO system. And he was Frank Capra's favorite director of photography and shot 18 of his films. In addition to his film work, Walker held 20 patents on various camera-related inventions he devised, including, and I might repeat myself here, including the double exposure system, several zoom lenses, Duomar lens for both motion picture and television cameras, the facial makeup meter, lightweight camera blimps, and optical diffusion techniques.
Wow. So,
this guy is quite...
literally a genius.
Yes. In 1994, many of Walker's inventions, lenses, devices, and patents were purchased by ASC museum curator Stephen Gaynor and are on display in the ASC Clubhouse in Hollywood in case anybody would ever care to check that out. And this fellow lived to be 92.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not surprised because I did really appreciate the cinematography of this film and just... It's black and white, but there was something different about this sort of black and white. I felt that the color grading for this film was phenomenal, and I don't know why.
Well, I have something that might give you some information on that.
Ah, alrighty.
Yes.
Perfect.
Capra had the film shot with a silk stocking over the lens to give the picture a diffused romantic look. When a clearer image of an individual was needed, a cigarette was used to burn a hole in the stocking. Unlike most Capra films, it contains a surrealistic dream sequence and a notable scene in which an optical printer is used to superimpose images of riots over Megan's face to make her emotional confusion seem more palpable.
Wow. So, yeah, no, that tracks. I very much got this sort of in a daze type of vibe. And that's why I thought the color grading was really interesting, especially for that time period. So I guess the old silk stocking trick that nobody's heard of. Sure.
Next plan.
Yeah.
Next time we want to use the sort of soft focus, just throw a silk stocking over there. They also said that this Joseph Walker, he was a really proficient lighting guy too, so that's probably another thing. Yeah, what you might notice.
There's
that
a lot
lighting,
of shadows you notice throughout the film, so that would make sense. They said he was
an expert lighter. So yeah. I just couldn't continue to go on and on about him, or else the whole podcast would be about this fellow Joseph Walker.
Shout out to him.
Yeah, I mean, amazing, absolutely amazing, and I really hadn't had him before, so I am really impressed. The editor, Edward Curtiz, nominated for 1 Oscar. Come and Get It. He started out, that's the name of the film, Come and Get It. It sounded a little weird. He started out in Hollywood as a stuntman, particularly in aviation films. He was actually an aviator. When working on a Howard Hawks film, he made some suggestions about shooting a scene, which made Hawks recommend him as an editor. He would work as an editor for 5 decades. He is known for Scarface, My Little Chickadee, Paris Calling, and even edited several episodes of The Twilight Zone. Ooh. He was also the original editor of A Touch of Evil before leaving the project due to creative differences with Orson Welles. So we did talk about him before briefly.
And of course, he just had to leave because he couldn't agree with Orson Welles.
Well, Orson Welles he wanted things done Orson Welles' way. So,
that's how he was.
Yeah. Which, I totally understand. I feel the same way about my projects.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I should mention that Ed and I did do a podcast on A Touch of Evil. That's one of our podcast episodes, and it's a really great episode, so go check that out as well. The score, W. Frank Harling. Okay, well, first I'll say he was nominated for 2 Oscars. He won for Stagecoach, which is a really nice score, the original Stagecoach. He was born in London but went to school at the Grace Choir Church in New York City. He spent 2 years in the United States Military Academy at West Point and composed both its hymn, called The Corps, and its official march called West Point Forever. So those songs they still use today, he composed them. He began doing songs and scores on Broadway before moving to Hollywood in 1928, where he would score films in the mid-1940s. He is known for 2 songs he composed, Beyond the Blue Horizon and Sing You Sinners, which was a hit Tony Bennett song in 1950. Beyond the Blue Horizon was actually used in several popular films, including Rain Man and Major League. He is known for Farewell to Arms and Penny Serenade. Now, with the score here, I notice mostly just sounds, not very much score, except in certain areas. There's a little bit of a very Asian-sounding music, but mostly a lot of you hear a lot of background sounds.
When I was thinking about the film after watching it, quite frankly, the score just sort of didn't even cross my mind.
It really isn't.
There's nothing much memorable about it. I think part of that is because the dialogue for me overshadowed it, but I think it also played in well with the dialogue. Like we were saying, like the cinematography, it very much was just sort of in the background to kind of help the story flow, but nothing really memorable about it.
There really isn't much. There isn't much score in there. There's certain places where he'll put on some music and then the score will come in, or some music will come in, whether part of the score or whatever. But most of it's very similar to when we talked about Hut, just the sounds, the general sounds that would be in place. That's what you hear most of.
Yeah, it's a very minimalistic approach, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, it's actually nice. It really helps that sort of newsreel documentary feel to this film. This film has a very strong newsreel documentary feel to it.
Yeah, anytime there's a minimalistic score like this, it personally, for me, helps immerse me further in the story.
Yeah.
Like you said, I feel like I'm either there or, like you said, the newsreel, I'm watching this firsthand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I thought we should give a shout out to the costume designers because, again, the costume's another thing that maybe could have been nominated in this film. They have some very beautiful Asian, look very authentic type costumes. Robert Kolak and Edward Stevenson, both uncredited. Robert Kolak was a Columbia guy specializing mostly in gowns. He was considered the #1 dress designer at Columbia and worked on numerous films from the early 1930s to the late 1940s. He was gay and he had a long-term partner, Joseph Demarius, whom he lived with and even hired as a secretary later in his career at Columbia. He suffered from numerous phobias. One was riding upright in the backseat of a car. He would not be able to do that. He would only ride in a car huddled on the floor with a blanket covering him. He tried to avoid riding in cars at all costs. He died at the early age of 54 from a heart attack, sadly, but oddly enough, his partner, Demarius, would die later the same day from liver disease. He was a severe alcoholic. It was so odd that they actually investigated the deaths to see if there was some foul play involved, but no, they both actually died of natural causes just on the same exact day.
That is really weird.
Yeah, I thought that was... He's known for It Happened One Night, His Girl Friday, The Awful Truth, and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Those are a couple Capra films. He was a Columbia guy, so Capra was a Columbia guy. Edward Stevenson is a 3-time Oscar nominee. He won an Oscar for The Facts of Life. He started out working for various studios before procuring a long-term contract with RKO from 1936 to 1950. He would leave RKO because of his dislike of how Howard Hughes was running RKO. A lot of people left for that reason. In the mid-1950s, he was contacted by Lucille Ball, who he had dressed on previous films. She would hire him to work on her television show I Love Lucy. He would work exclusively with Lucille Ball until his death in 1968. He is known for Out of the Past, Citizen Kane, The Magnificent Ambersons, and Suspicion. Now, we're going to talk about one of my faves, director Frank Capra. I'm a big fan of Frank Capra. Not my most favorite, but he's up there. Nominated for 6 Academy Awards. He did win 3 Oscars for It Happened One Night, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, and You Can't Take It With You. He was born in Italy. He was one of 7 children. His family was very poor. They immigrated to the U.S. when he was 5, and they had to come on a ship in steerage, which is basically where they would put livestock.
Oh, yeah.
They just jammed all these people in steerage together. He said it was horribly humiliating and disgusting. They would settle in L.A. in a poor section of town. Frank would insist on attending college, and he worked numerous various jobs to put himself through college, studying chemical engineering. He is the only one of the 7 children that went to college. Capra would join the U.S. Army in World War I, but contracted the Spanish flu and was discharged. He would struggle to find work, and he would live almost a drifter-type lifestyle for a period of time. He would see an article in a paper about a newly opened movie studio looking for employees, and he applied to work, and he made up this lie about having film experience. He was hired, and he began directing silent shorts. He would also do any random film job, including writing, editing, assistant directing, and title writing. He would meet Harry Cohn at one of his early studio gigs, who would eventually become the head of Columbia Studios, which in the early days was more of a B studio. It didn't have the clout of MGM or anything like that. Cohn would contract Capra as a director for Columbia. However, Capra would leave Columbia after a dispute over a film about composer Chopin and would go to Warner Brothers. When World War II came, Capra quit Hollywood altogether to help with the war efforts. He was too old to enlist, but instead he produced a documentary series called Why We Fight to encourage the morale of soldiers. The Why We Fight series is a widely considered a masterpiece of war information documentaries. Prelude to War, the first film in that series, won the 1942 Academy Award for Best Documentary. When his career ended, Capra regarded these films were his most important works. Following It's a Wonderful Life and State of the Union, which were done soon after the war ended, Capra's themes were becoming out of step with changes in the film industry and the public mood. Capra has kind of those heartwarming type films. It says that Capra's ideas were popular with Depression era and pre-war audiences, but they became less relevant in the prospering post-war America. Capra's basic films of championing the common man, as well as his use of spontaneous, fast-paced dialogue and goofy, memorable leads and supporting characters, made him one of the most popular and respected filmmakers of the 20th century. He is also known for Lost Horizon, which Lost Horizon is a great film too, Lady for a Day, and Pocketful of Miracles. He lived to be 94 years old. I really like Frank Capra.
Yeah, I've really only just started developing an appreciation for him. I definitely want to see more of his stuff.
You just saw Mr. Smith Goes
I
to
know,
Washington.
yeah. And I've seen It's a Wonderful Life, and I've probably seen 1 or 2 of his other films, but not really focused on him or, his talent. I've known about him for years because he is a very famous, golden age director. But yeah, I want to kind of study him a bit more.
Yeah, You Can't Take It With You. I'd recommend that one. That's, if you like his more heartwarming films like that, that to me is my favorite of his heartwarming type films. You Can't Take It With You. It's really, really nice.
And it's interesting, your point about how post-war World War II America sort of kind of steered away from his heartwarming films. I think that's partially because he was very much like rags to riches.
Yeah.
The good guy always wins.
Yep.
And although people wanted happy things after the war, after what everybody dealt with, times had changed. And it's just interesting how America was doing well, so there wasn't as many rags to riches stories.
Yeah, they didn't necessarily need the uplifting films like they did in the Depression era, for example.
The economy was booming. People had their riches already. They're like, why do we want to remember when we were poor?
Yeah.
It almost kind of reversed on him.
Yeah, I almost feel like film noir was a lot more popular in that frame, too, that film noir came into a movement and people started to really like that kind of film, and that certainly isn't happy, so.
No.
A little bit of trivia. Capra believed The Bitter Tea of General Yen was a woman's picture. He asked 65 stenographers at the studio to vote for their favorite actor, and by a 3-1 margin, they chose Niles Astor for the lead in the film.
Wow.
He was very dashing. It's hard to tell in this particular film, but he was a good-looking guy. The surreal, impressionistic dream sequence was, at the time, thought to be the only way American audiences would accept the information that Megan was sexually attracted to the Chinese general.
So I thought that dream sequence was interesting because, first off, it's kind of random.
Yeah.
It makes sense in the sense that they were trying to convey, that like, sexual attraction. It also made sense, I appreciate, because if you look at the film reels from that time and then shortly thereafter, like the following decade, when superheroes started to come into prominence, we're talking like the transition from the pulps like Flash Gordon and the Phantom to more, Batman and Superman type of things. That dream sequence very much had the feel of one of those shorts that they would play during the Saturday morning.
Yeah, the villain is coming.
Yes. And there's a hero in a mask and punching and grabbing, getting the girl, she falls into your arms. And it's really interesting too, because around that time period, General Yen, like how he's portrayed in the movie with his outfits, his attire, just how he conducts himself as a leader. All the Chinese villains from that time period in the early comic books, in the pulps, were designed to look exactly like that. Oh. So I felt that was an interesting connection to the pulps that I felt that they were trying to make, because people who were at the movies probably saw those same shorts.
Yes, good info. But yeah, we'll get to that as well later. The Bitter Tea of General Yen was the very first film to play at Radio City Music Hall upon opening on January 6, 1933. It was also one of the first films to deal openly with interracial sexual attraction. It was scheduled for a 2-week run, but the theater yanked it after 8 days and $80,000 in grosses, despite the certainty of a loss on its rental fee.
Yikes.
Yeah. Stanwyck blamed its poor box office showing on the racist backlash. Yeah, it did quite bad. With a budget of $1 million, the film was one of the smallest budgets Capra ever worked with, which $1 million in 1933 was a very large budget, actually, especially for a B studio like Columbia. The production utilized $200,000 worth of Chinese antiques and art objects as set decorations, $7,000 of that being spent on acquiring a bronze incense burner.
Wow, okay.
one. Was that, could we not just make one that looked...
Yeah, that's...
I guess he really wanted to go for the realism.
Yeah.
The film was one of Capra's few commercial failures, partly due to it being banned in Britain, probably for the...
Yeah.
Interracial
thing.
Yep, unfortunately. All right. Are you ready?
Yes.
Let's get to it. Start out at the beginning. The credits, right off the bat, the credit text has an Asian-looking font. It's very interesting. And plus, if you look at the background graphics behind the credits, they're sort of crude-looking Asian drawings as well, crude-looking Asian art. Then you start getting these words. You get the scene. This is so documentary. Like, really, there's so much newsreel likeness about this particular film. If you could be watching a newsreel and portions of
especially with the transitions from scene to scene, very much that newsreel.
That's very Frank Capra too.
Yeah, that's
Frank
true.
Capra does that in a lot of his films. If you watch even It Happened One Night, even he does a lot of those kind of transitions.
It's if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah,
No.
His early stuff is all very like that. You get these words, Shanghai, and then burning of Shapei.
That sounds right.
Okay. And then refugees. It's just these words that come up on the screen superimposed over this scene of chaos and people screaming and whatever. And this is what I'm talking about, background noises. You hear shots, you hear bombs, you hear chaos, you hear the rain.
Traffic.
You don't hear any music. This is just pure, again, this is so newsreel-like. You see people running, fleeing, the buildings in back. They have this huge city built. Like I'm saying, these sets are really something. This is not actual newsreel footage. This is actually stuff they shot on a set, but it could be exactly like newsreel footage. It's very, very impressive, especially for 1933. And then it's so interesting with the way they do this sort of scene cross-cutting here, where you go from these horrible riots and this chaos on the streets to this society lady's house, and this woman, she's answering the door and getting guests, and this woman is so insufferable. She's really insufferable.
They were very much upper class white people, which it was a stark contrast to, like you just said, the poor. There were little kids running around that were poor, in the streets.
Yeah.
In the scene before, and also to your point about just sort of the setting the scene, I personally don't know much about that civil war that was going on. And so at the time, if it was like a newsreel, the viewers might not have known a lot about it. So they were trying to set the stage there. But for me, you know, almost 100 years later, not having that historical knowledge, it also did the same job of setting the scene for me very well. So I kind of knew where we were, the gist of what was going on, and then the stark contrast again between East versus West.
Yep, you get it right off the bat. It's so interesting the way he did this. But this woman, she's welcoming the guests. These people are coming in from the rain. There's all the outside chaos. People are getting burnt. They're walking in with umbrellas. Oh, it's such a rainy night. How horrible this weather is. You know, like, oh my God, it's so ridiculous. And then she says, I thought it was very funny that she said this line, and this is what I mean about certain dialogue lines. When everybody's coming in, at one point she makes this, everybody in China is here. And it's all white people. So it's like, no, lady. No. But then you see the singers, the musicians, they're Chinese. The servants are Chinese. What it is a bunch of people talking. At first, you don't really know what's going on. But then you get to know as you hear the conversations of the people. They're talking about this couple that is getting married. You haven't seen any of the people, but they're saying they're childhood sweethearts. They're giving you a backstory, basically, for this whole thing. They're two childhood sweethearts. They haven't seen each other in 3 years. You get the point that the groom is a missionary. And they say he's not picking his bride up at the train station because he got stuck doing some missionary work. And then they're saying the bride, Megan, she comes from an old New England family. You get a ton of backstory just in the gossip between the guests.
Literally only exposition in that whole scene, which
but I mean, it tells you everything you need to know, to be honest. And then there's this priest that's wondering, is this girl going to be happy as a missionary? And he reminisces how difficult missionary work can be. He tells this horrible story about he's trying to preach about the crucifixion to these Mongolians, and then he thinks they're listening, he thinks they're getting the whole gist of things, and the next thing he knows, he finds out that all they did was the next people they attacked or whatever, they crucified them. They used the crucifixion story as what to do to people.
As horrific as that was, I again felt like that was showing a reoccurring theme through the movie of there's some people with good intentions, but they're not going about them the right way.
Yeah. And the thing that's really, really bad about that particular scene is after he tells this story about how these Mongolians, he said, that, my friends, is China. And it's like, oh, Jesus. But and then as soon as he said that, there's a slide right, and you just get this picture of this Chinese man just standing there, which is very interesting the way they did that, to be honest.
Yeah, I really think, too, part of this movie was to show the West is well-intended, but you guys need to do a better job of trying to understand who you're trying to work with, who you're trying to help, because you can't truly help somebody if you don't understand them.
Right.
And so I think that this movie, in a weird way, really tried to show we're all people. We're not actually that different unless you focus on those differences, which you have all these missionaries, you have all these people living in China, and they're like, we're here to help, but they're kind of missing the big picture.
Yeah, and the way, as we go on, the way that they refer to the Chinese makes it sound like they don't think of these people as human beings, more like savages, really, is what they seem to think of them
which
as.
Is, like you said with that Mongolians comment, it's like, you're a Christian missionary and you're using a derogatory term. That's not very Christ-like, you know?
Yeah, it will go from there as well. This will continue on, so expect this sort of thing. And then it'll cut again back to the outside with the chaos. It's just so weird to go from these polite society party to this horrible chaos outside. And this is when there's a rickshaw driver. You see him, he's trying to pull the rickshaw in the mud, and he gets hit by this car. And this lady that's in the rickshaw gets out. She starts freaking out. This lady is our main character, Megan Davis, played by Barbara Stanwyck. As she gets out, this other man's calling. It's all raining. It's chaos. It's really chaotic. And this man's trying to tell her, hey, I have another rickshaw for you. But she's all upset about this rickshaw driver. And the car that hit the rickshaw driver, a man appears from that. We're going to find out is General Yen. We don't find that out right now, but that's who it is. Megan starts flipping out on him. She's yelling at him. And then this other man comes up, I believe to be a policeman. I'm not sure. But he starts speaking French. And I said, why? Why is he speaking French?
I was.
Well, what is going on?
This scene thoroughly confused me. It was only later that I really understood what was going on.
Why was he speaking French
I was
China?
overstimulated by like you said. There was a French guy. There was like a car accident.
So
There's
confusing.
yelling. I swear there were chickens and children running in the streets. It was wild.
Yeah. And Megan's trying to help. She wants help for this poor rickshaw driver. She thinks there's some way to help him. Apparently I think the guy is dead. And then the man notices that he's bleeding. I'll just say General Yen so we don't get confused, but General Yen notices that he's bleeding, and there's this little point here. She offers him her handkerchief. She says, "Oh, I'm sorry." She offers him her handkerchief, and he has his own. He takes it out of his sleeve. Handkerchiefs are a big deal in this film. This thing has gone through several times. There's some significance to the handkerchief.
I think part of that was just, to me, it was symbolic for her realizing the human connection.
And showing that he has some level of there's some level of sophistication.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's also intimacy, because your handkerchief, that was your thing.
Yeah.
You carried it everywhere. Some people had them embroidered with your initials. To give that to somebody was a sign of kindness and comfort. And so for her to give that to a stranger
who she was angry at.
Yeah, like you could see from his reaction, he was sort of surprised, but very gladly accepted it.
No, he didn't. He took his own.
Oh, he didn't?
No, he didn't
I
take
missed
her
that.
handkerchief. No.
See, I was
he took his own out of his sleeve.
Oh.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying the fact that he had a handkerchief made him look more like European, not so much. Not that Chinese people couldn't have handkerchiefs, but he seemed very, gentlemanly.
He got me. I thought he used hers this entire time.
He pulled his own out. Yep, and then he tells her, "Oh, it's raining. You're getting wet." And meanwhile, she does not appear to be wet at all.
That's a good point.
She was not.
Again,
nothing looked wet about her.
But it
was supposed to be pouring rain.
Yeah,
yet her hair looked perfectly.
There
fine.
was so much going on in this scene. I didn't even notice that, and I literally thought he took her handkerchief. Hey.
Yeah, it's hard if you're not watching for things.
Yeah.
There is so much chaos that it's hard to tell. And then that man that was calling her earlier came over. He has a new rickshaw. He helps her into it. And she's so worried about this guy. And then the man says, "Human life is the cheapest thing in China."
That was one of the lines that absolutely struck me.
Mm-hmm.
I was just dumbfounded. It stuck with me, and it leaves you thinking the rest of the film.
Yeah, but then again, this is another white male saying this. Mm-hmm. So it's just another example of how the white people perceive the Chinese people. Then she's sitting in a rickshaw. She watches another car come up to General Yen, and there's this woman in here that we're going to find out is Ma Li, but we don't know this yet. And she has this sort of voyeuristic thing where she watches General Yen with Ma Li. It happens several times in the film, and she watches how she takes him into the car. She starts comforting him, and she's watching this very carefully. I've seen this a couple times, so it's interesting that they keep spotlighting this. But I do want to talk about Barbara Stanwyck before we get too far, since we mentioned her. Barbara Stanwyck plays Megan Davis. She's a 4-time Oscar nominee. Sadly, she never won. She's an excellent actress. She did win an honorary Oscar. She was born Ruby Catherine Stevens. She was the youngest of 5 children. When she was 4, her mother died of a miscarriage after being pushed off a streetcar by a drunkard.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, it gets worse. 2 weeks later, her father joined a crew to dig the Panama Canal and was never seen again.
Wow.
At first, her oldest sister Mildred cared for her, but when Mildred got a job as a showgirl, she was forced into numerous foster homes, many of which she ran away from. She had trouble in school getting along with the other children, and she would quit at age 14 and began working. She was fascinated with Mildred's job and was determined to get into show business, and at age 16, she would get a job as a dancer with the Ziegfeld Follies, which was the big deal back then. She would get a small part in a Broadway play called The Noose, and she would change her name to Barbara Stanwyck. Her naturalistic acting talent was recognized immediately, and she was able to get more work on Broadway. She was not long on Broadway before Hollywood started showing interest in her, and she would start acting in films. She was very successful in pre-code films, being able to play a very hard-bitten, ruthless type better than most anyone. However, she was also versatile enough to do comedy and had several screwball comedy hits as well. In fact, she was easily able to adapt to almost any genre of film. After a very successful film career, she was able to transition into television in the 1960s with The Barbara Stanwyck Show, The Big Valley, and eventually the acclaimed miniseries The Thornbirds. She had a very tumultuous relationship with her first husband, Frank Fay. Their marriage was rumored to be the basis for the story of A Star is Born. Her second husband was actor Robert Taylor. They would divorce eventually due to his numerous infidelities, and she would never remarry. Barbara is known for numerous films, including The Strange Love of Martha Ivers, Double Indemnity, and Stella Dallas. I love Barbara Stanwyck. She might be my absolute all-time favorite actress.
It's interesting you point out that she's known for this naturalistic acting. 100%.
She's great.
You can see. Not knowing who she is going into this movie, and I would argue probably any movie she would appear in, you could just see how natural she is. And that's interesting too, that she was so just flexible, because obviously this is a pre-code movie. She was in a very unique situation with filming it. Complete natural.
Yeah, but she plays a good girl in this one. You should you see her in other pre-codes. She can be very ruthless. Oh. And I mean, even if you've just seen Double Indemnity, it's a great example of her versatility as an actress. She's really good in Stella Dallas. Actually, she should have won the Academy Award for that, in my opinion. Okay, let's get back. She goes off in the rickshaw. There's a film dissolve, and now we're back to the society scene. And then Megan comes into the house, and that's, again, I said she's not wet at all somehow, but that obnoxious lady, I think that lady's name in the film is Miss Amelia Hansen. I absolutely hate this lady. She's atrociously. Yeah. She's the worst example of a horrible, religious, judgmental person. I just really don't like her. That's just the actress. Not the actress, I mean, that's just the character. I'm sure the actress is not
actress
like that.
Might have been an
she was
amazing lady.
A nice lady, but... And Megan's talking about the accident, and she's trying to find out from this lady who is the man in the car. She wants to know who that is. And she said he looked very civilized. And the woman tells her, he may look civilized, but they are all tricky, treacherous, and immoral. She can't tell one from the other, all Chinamen to her.
Yeah, which is just absolutely horrific. Like you can't get more racist than that. Essentially, like that's
just as racist as you can be.
Just that one sentence is so full of hate, and she said it so nonchalantly.
And that's why I said this lady is absolutely the example of the worst type of society woman you can find.
100%.
And then all of a sudden the groom is announced. Megan runs down to see him. She embraces him. His name is Bob. Bob tells her, guess what? We have to delay the wedding. I have to go grab some orphans out of a war zone. Wedding not important. He says he has to get a pass from a Chinese general. And the woman, again, this horrible woman says, that's what we call our gangsters here, generals. So, but Bob says he has to get a pass from General Yen, who they then call a bandit. That's another word they use a lot for the Chinese, are bandits. They said he expelled all missionaries from his province, General Yen. I wonder why. I'm beginning to understand. And the others think that he's not going to want to help Bob. But Megan insists on coming. At first, Bob says, no, you won't be safe there. But then all of a sudden, he's very proud that she wants to help. And he says they'll be back in 2 hours.
Wow.
We'll see about that. And then you get a fade to black. They pull up in a car. Bob tells her to stay in the car. Megan's being very frivolous and silly at this time, like making all these funny little comments. I don't think she understands the gravity of what's going on here at this point. It's
probably because too she lived a very isolated, sheltered, prim and proper life where she was she was safe, and now she's in the complete opposite.
You would think her experience that she's already seen in China with the killing, you would think that was somewhat
you would think, but remember, this is a woman who's not fazed by the rain.
True, so, that's true. And she doesn't even get wet somehow.
Yeah, so she might just be just above everybody,
So Bob tells her to stay in the car. She does, and then the scene changes to we see there's some men playing a card game. There's the man in the car, General Yen. He's there with some other Chinese soldier and an American. And they have another one of these slide right transitions. You see they do these sort of slide right transitions things several times in the film. It's very interesting when they do that.
I was wondering if...
That is kind of real-like, too.
Yeah, it is real-like. And I kind of pictured almost like a sliding...
Yeah, like a slide.
Yeah, like a door.
They do it a couple times. This is another one. And then here is some music in the scene. There's a sort of Asian flute-sounding music that's in this particular scene when they're playing the cards. And then we find out the American, his name is Jones, is the financial advisor to General Yen. We'll talk about General Yen real quick. Niles Astor, again... Yeah, Niles Astor, anyhow, born in Sweden. His parents were not married when he was born, although his father had promised to marry his mother, and he was sent to a foster home for the first year of his life before rejoining his now married biological parents. He would attend the Royal Dramatic Theatre School in Stockholm and would begin working on the stage. Moritz Stiller, who began the career of Greta Garbo, got him his first role in film. He would then move to Hollywood and he had success in silent films, and his most successful ones being opposite fellow Swede Greta Garbo. They were good friends. He worked with a diction coach to minimize his accent to continue working in talkies. Although he was gay, he was forced into a lavender marriage by the studios. A lavender marriage is when they make gay men marry a woman so they don't get known to be gay, because that was a taboo back in the 30s. He would have one daughter from that marriage. He was blacklisted in 1935 for breaching a studio contract and would go to England for 6 years to work in films. Unfortunately, when he returned to Hollywood, he no longer had leading man status and his roles became diminished. He would attempt to get television work with little success and would have to return to Sweden being financially broke. He did not have much more success in Sweden and would retire in 1963 to devote himself to painting. Known for Our Dancing Daughters, Wild Orchids, and The Single Standard. The Single Standard is excellent, an excellent silent film. If anybody wants to ever dig that one up, Greta Garbo and Niles Astor, very, very good. One of my personal favorites. I think he's fantastic in this film. The makeup makes him look very weird. He looks very odd. This Asian style makeup, he looks strange. But he's actually was in real life a very good looking guy. And you can tell this guy is a silent film actor because he does so much with subtlety with his expressions. Would not even be able to do much with his expressions because the way they have this makeup, I don't think he could do much with his face, but just these little gestures and the way he smiles sometimes, he does quite a lot with very little.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because you could tell he's a very good actor.
Yeah.
He did well in the role. Never should have been cast in that role because, like you said, oh my goodness, the makeup on him, it was stupid. It was cartoon-like.
Yeah, it looks very bad. I mean, I've seen worse. Mickey Rooney, Breakfast at Tiffany's. But,
oh yeah.
And the thing I thought he did a good job of avoiding was the overly stereotypical Asian portrayal that I've seen some people do, where they're like bowing and it just.
You're right. There was a sort of subtlety to it, which I thought came off as his character having some skewed sense of honor in a way with these little gestures he would do.
Yes.
The way that he treated people throughout the film, you could see that, sometimes he was a tyrant, and other times there was this interesting sense of humanity. Yeah. And he did that in very subtle ways to your point. And I also what you mentioned about like having the lavender marriage, I had not come across that term before until reading a little bit about him. Yeah. I knew that happened. I didn't know there was a term for it. And it's just good for him for continuing to carry on acting as best he could. Unfortunately, it ultimately didn't work out. But like you said, he left a good body of work for his leading man years.
Yeah. Yeah, the same thing happened to Rock Hudson. He was also in a lavender marriage most of his life.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're in this card room, right? And all of a sudden, Dr. Strike is announced by one of these Chinese men, and Jones, right away, you can see gets all up in arms. Jones is very excitable. We'll talk about him in a moment, but Jones is very excitable. He doesn't want Dr. Strike seeing General Yen. They consider this guy their enemy. They don't like missionaries, etc. And he says, put this guy off. But the general winds up seeing Dr. Strike, and Dr. Strike asks him for the pass, and the general says, it's an inferno. Why do you want to go out there? And who are these orphans? Orphans are nobodies. They're people with no ancestors. They're not important,
That's another one of the lines that struck me. Like, what is wrong with you people?
People with no ancestors. And then he tries to bribe him with some sing-song girls. He says, oh, we've got some sing-sing girls. Don't you want to come see them? And the doctor's like, no.
No, thank you.
I'm a missionary. And then General Yen says, hey, I'm not supposed to be here. I can't be putting my name on a pass. And he says, well, if you don't put your name on a pass, I'm going to tell the foreign authorities that you're here. And then I think this is so cool, the way he does this. When he threatens him like that, you see him give this like little smile, and then he toasts him. And he says, here is to your very good health, as if to almost a threat in the toast, as if to say, oh yeah, well, hope you live.
Yeah.
It's just the way he says it seems like an underlying threat. After Strike just threatened him, he sort of threatens him back. I like how impassive General Yen always is. That's what I wrote. He's always very impassive. Nothing phases him.
Yeah.
People threaten him and he just smiles, and he gives this sort of veiled threat back.
He is cool and calm the entire movie, whether he's getting good news bad news or something in between. He just has this sense of control. He's very stoic with everything. And yet, again, there are these moments of great romance or where he almost tries to show love. And then there's moments where he's doing something very bad.
Yes.
It's all the same with him.
Yeah, it's interesting. So anyway, he decides he's going to write this pass. And then as he's writing the pass, Jones come in. He's talking about these negotiations. And Yen says, I can't be dealing with business negotiations. I have to deal with orphans. And Jones, I love the way Jones has some of the best dialogue in this film, I'll be honest. Jones asks how the missionary racket is to Dr. Strike. And Strike tells him that he tells them both, he postponed getting married to come here and go get the orphans. And General Yen is like, this is the most shocked of General Yen in the whole thing, that he can't believe that Dr. Strike has postponed a marriage to come get these orphans. And then he asks if he can read Chinese, and Dr. Strike says, oh, not yet. And then he writes on the pass, it says, this fool prefers civil war to the loving arms of his bride, General Nobody.
Which is just hilarious.
Yeah.
And again, it shows how well-intended but out of touch these missionaries are.
Yeah.
They don't even know the native language. And that's because, gosh, they didn't put in the time and effort because they see it as beneath them, completely contradicting the points that they're trying to make.
So these people should become English. That's
exactly
their
so
theory.
I thought that was funny on the general's part, personally, as terrible as it is.
Yeah. Let's talk about Jones now, Walter Connolly. God, I love Walter Connolly. He's a great, great character actor. Born in Cincinnati, he attended the Cincinnati College of Music and immediately began acting in local theater productions. He would join the U.S. Marines in World War I, and upon his return, he would go to Ireland to attend the University of Dublin. At this point, he wanted to give up acting. However, upon visiting the famous Abbey Theater, he changed his mind and returned to the U.S., where he would have success on the Broadway stage. Although he would make a couple silent films, he did not have any real success in film until the early 30s, mostly due to his performance in It Happened One Night as the rich tycoon father, a character he was often typecast as. He was very fond of horse racing. He initially wanted to be a jockey until he found it interfered with his eating habits. And then he dropped that. Well, you have to be very thin to be a jockey.
I
His
guess
career,
so.
and he's like, to heck with that. I want to eat. His career unfortunately ended with his death in 1940 of a stroke at the young age of 53. He is known for Libeled Lady, 20th Century, and Lady for a Day. He's really, really good. And actually, of all the performances, I've seen him in some really good performances, but of all the performances I've seen him in, I think I like him best in this film. He just really plays this particular character really well.
Yeah, it was interesting how he was also very stereotypical American in this movie. What perhaps the West viewed the Americans as sort
this
of,
way, yes.
Yeah, sort of that different, perspective, very much for the moment, capitalistic, greedy type of person.
But he's also very loyal, and he treats the Chinese as human beings, more so than the other white characters in the film. He doesn't seem to look down on them as much. At least certainly not General Yen. He seems to treat General Yen as another equal.
I think he sees them as a business opportunity.
Yeah.
And you're right. Like, I think that he realizes that there's this disconnect, East versus West, and he just decides not to do anything about it. Whereas the other characters don't even see what they're doing or saying contradicts what they're trying to do.
Yeah. He does, and like I said, I think he has some of the best lines in the film. He has some of the most interesting lines in the film.
It was kind of funny for me. At some point, I felt like he should have talked sort of like a 30s gangster, say, but I like that he didn't, because then that would have made that
would
very
have been too stereotypical.
Exactly,
No.
and like over-the-top cartoonish.
No,
So I like that he delivered his lines in this very natural, nonchalant manner.
Yeah. So then after he gives them this pass, there's a film dissolved. You're back in the streets. There's bombing. They're driving through the streets. There's all the chaos. Anytime they're on the streets, it's incredible chaos. There's a sign for an orphanage, and then these soldiers come over to the car, and Strike gives them the pass. And what do they do? They read the pass, and what do? They start laughing. And so Strike and Megan are like, oh, well, it must be all good. And then they start leering at Megan because of the pass, what he wrote in the pass. And then Strike gets mad and starts pushing them. And then they have to go run into the building because the soldiers are going to attack them. And then the lady's in there, Miss Reed, and she said there's only 6 orphans left, and they start to get them ready to go. But Megan's looking out the window, and what happens? Of course, they left their car outside. Of course, the soldiers just took the car. I mean, I don't know what they thought was going to happen, but
they just
made off with the car.
I mean, noticing that, I'm like, did you leave the key? Like, I don't know. I guess.
Yeah, it may have been quite easy to
They could have hotwired it.
hotwire cars back then. I'm not really sure about this. But anyhow, they took the car. So now, oh no, what are we going to do? The car's taken. So Bob says, oh, now we have to go on foot. And Miss Reed starts getting upset. She's like, no, these children under my care, I can't have them doing that. And finally, they decide, yes, they do have to go on foot. And they're taking these kids through the cities. And again, there's all the shooting going on. You see Molotov cocktails being thrown into buildings. It's very dramatic. And again, this is very newsreel-like. That's just what it reminds you of. The city's burning. All of a sudden, the tanks come by. They have to hide behind some flour sacks or whatever the heck they're behind. And there's all this shooting. And even the flour sacks where they're right at are getting shot. And then you get a close-up. This is one of the things that Frank Capra does really well, is these close-ups to the children's faces as they're watching all this chaos and shooting going on, and just their expressions. It's very poignant.
He lit up characters' faces very well.
That's our Walker. That's our cinematographer.
Yeah. And it was amazing. It was almost like a candlelight to characters in certain scenes.
Yeah, and it's just the way that these kids are looking. It's very, it just makes you feel something. And then I wrote, Bob uses her name excessively in this scene. Megan, this. Megan. Actually, they call her Megan for some reason, but I call her Megan. I don't know what Megan, but whatever. He'd be like, Megan, we have to go here. Megan, we have to go there. Megan, do this. Megan, do that. And I'm like, oh my God, we know what her name is. Jeez. But anyhow, they're trying to get to this North Station, which is a train station, I guess, or some sort of a train station. And then now you have these planes flying overhead too, and you hear the noise of the planes. The city's burning. The refugees are all trying to get into the station. There's lots of gunfire, crowd chaos, and then there's a pig squealing and everything, because there's somebody carrying a pig, and they're trying to get the orphans in these rickshaws. So they get Miss Reed and a lot of the orphans in the first rickshaw. They go off. The second rickshaw, they're loading up, and as they're loading up the rickshaw, this man tries to get the rickshaw, and Dr. Strike shoves him away, and he gets really angry. And as Dr. Strike is loading these children into the rickshaw, he hits him with a stick on the back of the head, and that makes Dr. Strike fall into the rickshaw, and then the rickshaw just takes off with them, and Megan's there by herself, and she's like, hey, Bob, wait. And so the guy just hits her too with a stick for no apparent reason. But before that happens, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before they both get hit in the head with a stick, we see a car drive up, and the window gets rolled down, and who is it but General Yen smoking a cigarette. But I would tell you that he is always smoking in this film. I swear he has a cigarette in every single scene. But he sees Megan, and then he witnesses this guy hitting them with sticks. So the last thing you see is this man hitting her with a stick, and she falls. And then this is when they have one of those sort of scenes with the optical printer where you see her face and all these things are happening over her face. They're sort of showing a recap of what's happening. There's chaos. There's a scene where she sees Bob and they're kissing, like in the beginning at the house. And then there's more chaos. And it's almost like she's going through what just happened in the last however many hours. But again, it's all superimposed over her face, which again, for 1933 is pretty cool. It's interesting that they use the optical printer to do that, to make that happen. And somebody's putting a cloth over her head, and she wakes up and she sees she's on this train, and there's this woman here, this Chinese woman. We find out that's going to be Ma Li. She tells her, oh, nobody's going to hurt you. Drink some of this tea. General thinks it will do you good. And she's like, General, what? And she looks over, and General Yen is also sitting in the room, and he says he'll take care of her. And she recognizes him. She doesn't know where at first, but then she remembers he's the guy that hit her rickshaw driver. That's the only way she knows of him. She knows him as the guy that hit the rickshaw driver. And she seems kind of fond of him now, because she says what happened. He tells her the story. She said, oh, you rescued me. And he said, if you wish to see it that way, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, he just kind of was like, okay. During that scene, I actually started to sort of get Beauty and the Beast vibes. And that sort of carried throughout the rest of the film as it really became apparent the romance or attempted romance between the two of them.
Are you calling Niles Astor a beast?
A beastly, amazing actor, yes. A beast of a performer.
And of course, she wants to get off at the next station, naturally. He says, oh, we can't get off. You know, this is a troop train or whatever. And she says, can I get word to my friends? He said, oh, we'll arrange all that for you. Okay. And
not getting any of their information.
Yeah. We'll somehow get word to your friends.
Yeah.
And then she's thanking Ma Li, and the awkward thing is they're all in the same room, right? So this is another one of these voyeur scenes I'm talking about, because she's sitting there, she's watching them, and Ma Li goes over and she puts the pillow behind his head. She puts the blanket on him. She takes out a cigarette and Megan's watching this whole entire scene with interest. And then this is a really interesting scene because everything is conveyed at this scene with faces and close-ups. So right after that happens, Molly lays down in this way, this very seductive way, as if to say, come here. And the general looks at her, and then he looks over at Megan. And then Megan starts pulling her blanket up over, like she feels exposed the way he's looking at her. And then it just cuts close-ups to the faces. And then the next thing, it cuts to Molly, and she has this very hurt, jealous look. It's very apparent right then and there what exactly has happened. It's only done in close-ups. There's no dialogue at all. And I'm like, what did Molly think was going to happen? He was going to...
Yeah.
With Megan in the
room.
What's going on here?
That maybe that was her way of trying to still show that she was the favored one. Yeah. It kind of, this is my man type of thing, but very weird regardless, especially like, considering she was a stranger.
Can we wait till she goes to sleep
or
something?
something.
And another thing that makes this scene particularly great besides the close-ups is all you hear is the train noise in the background, the wheels or whatever. So it's really a beautiful scene, done really, really well. And then they're showing the train traveling. There's a fade to black, and now they're in the palace, which again, okay, this is gorgeous set design. I mean, whoever put this together, and it's huge. It's this huge set. It's this ginormous palace. It's amazing. These sets are freaking amazing. I'm very impressed with them. And they had only $1 million, which in 1933 was quite a lot. But then you see Jones again. He's coming down the hall. He's talking to Yen. He's talking about this boxcar full of money that he has. He talks about this quite a lot, this boxcar full of money. And it doesn't seem very much like Yen is paying attention. So he says, hey, are you not interested in this war anymore? You have something else on the string? He says all these great idioms. And then General Yen starts talking about sending a missionary back to Shanghai. And he said, wow, I don't have the budget for that. Send the person back in a train. And he says, no, I'll send this lady back on a yacht. That's what I'm saying. It's a very interesting dialogue. And all of a sudden, Jones is getting concerned, like, oh, I knew this. There was a woman involved somewhere. That's what's going on here. And then when Yen tells him he's Dr. Strike's fiance, then Jones is even more concerned. He's like, hey, look, we don't need any more trouble from this Dr. Strike guy. Get her back there. Like, what are you doing? And Yen just doesn't take Jones seriously at all. And he says, gallantry is not one of your vices to Jones, which I think is another great line. These scenes are just going from scene to scene, basically. Then you hear this firing squad. Then you hear the noise, the gunshots.
Yeah.
And it's going to cross-cut from the firing squad to then Megan in her room. And this wakes her up. She gets up. She looks at the window. Of course, she's horrified to see that they're shooting all these people right outside her window. You know, it's very upsetting. And she tries to run away. She's banging on the door. And then you see that there are soldiers outside guarding her door. And you see them run off to tell somebody. And then they do a little swish pan here, which they do a lot of interesting camera transitions and editing transitions. So do a swish pan right, and these women start coming in with food and stuff, and one of the women is Mali, and Megan's like, where am I? And she's like, well, you're in General Yen's summer palace, and this is the first time she's heard the name General Yen, and she remembers it, you know, as the bandit that was supposed to give them the pass. And she says, General Yen, the bandit? She has not made the connection yet until General Yen then enters the room, and she's like, oh, okay, you're General Yen the bandit. So now she's upset, obviously. At first, remember, she liked him at first, and now that she realizes he's General Yen the bandit, she's not fond of him again. And then he says, he comes in he's very courteous at all times, very gentlemanly, very courteous. He says, I hope you slept well. And then there's this loud gunshot. She puts her hands to her ears, and he apologizes. He runs out. He says, quit, doing that.
Stop killing people.
Yeah, quit killing people outside the window.
Even though I ordered you to.
Yeah, and then he tells her, he's like, well, there's a famine and he can't feed the prisoners, but he'll make sure that they take him further away from her window next time when they're going to shoot people.
I'll have them be killed in the outer wall.
Yeah, he said they'll take them down the road in the future. Yeah. And then he just casually offers, oh, which cigarette would you like? I have these two brands.
And again, that's when, like I mentioned, that's a really terrible thing he's saying. Like, yeah, I'm having these people killed, but for your convenience and your comfort, like, we'll do it in a different place. Like, what a contradiction.
Yeah. And by the way, would you like a cigarette?
Yeah, and then also, next thing, and by the way.
Here's a cigarette. And so, of course, she calls him cold-blooded, and he's truly astonished by this. He says, isn't it better that they're shot than to be starved slowly? He honestly doesn't understand why she's...
Yeah.
thinks
truly
this is wrong.
thinks that
he thinks he's doing the right thing.
Yeah, doing the right and honorable thing.
And it's very ironic that he's saying that he can't feed the prisoners and then saying, I have Turkish or Virginia cigarettes. Which one do you prefer? And he's living in this lap of luxury. And it's like, well, I can't afford to feed the prisoners.
Yeah, they have lavish
it's kind
feasts. And also, Jones was just flexing about
the boxcar
full of money. Wait a minute.
Yeah, so, and then he tells Mali's still in the room. He tells Mali to go, and Megan doesn't want her to go, but she wants to know why he won't send her back to Shanghai. And he says, oh, it's not safe. She calls him a liar. You see, she's kind of afraid of him now. She's backing away from him. And she picks up this knife even behind her back and calls him a yellow swine.
Another derogatory jab right there.
And then it's funny when she says these things and he just kind of smiles at her. And it's almost like he forces her to realize that her behavior is becoming more barbarian and his is more civilized. And it makes her collect herself and behave in a more civilized fashion. So then says she would advise him to send her back as soon as he can. And he bows again. He says he is her most humble servant. He always says all these very, like I said, courteous things that people say, but everything is said in a very kind of mocking way almost. There's like almost an underlying meaning to everything he says. He says everything the right way you should, but the way he conveys it is very, it's very, what is the word?
Two-faced, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say like almost hypocritical, but it's not
quite.
like he isn't being courteous. He is, but there's just an underlying...
It's just manipulative, essentially, but he very much reminds me of a hotel clerk, like at the front desk. Like, I'm your host, let me know if you'll need anything while staying in my summer palace. Yeah. Oh, I'll tell them to stop shooting those guys. Like, don't you worry. You need your pillows fluffed? Molly can do that.
Or
like,
my concubine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like, wait a minute.
It's really interesting. And again, I said, nothing bothers General Yen. Niles plays him so subtly. He really does a great job on him. Since we talked about Mali, we'll talk about the actress Toshiya Mora. She was born in Japan. She would come to the U.S. around age 10. She was able to get work in some silent films in the mid-late 1920s. Most of her roles were small or uncredited in early talkies until 1932 when she was named the only non-Caucasian Wampus baby star. That's the only one that they ever had. Well, I don't know if they ever had, but at that point they had never had a non-Caucasian, and which was an annual list of promising young actresses. She was on that list. It is believed that this recognition led her to get the role in this film, which was originally supposed to go to Anna May Wong, who was the known Asian actress at the time. She got all the Asian roles. Unfortunately, her good performance in this film did not lead her to stardom. She would go on to play minor roles in subsequent films, with her film career ending in 1937. In her later years, she worked as a researcher for Robert Ripley on Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Oh, that's really cool. Good for her. Yeah, she was great in this movie
she was very good
as
in this
well.
Film. Very good in this film. I was really impressed with her.
Yeah, she really had a rough role. She basically got tossed aside and disrespected a lot.
Yeah. Again, she also played her role very subtly with a lot of subtle face motions and stuff. Okay, so it's back in the room with Jones and Yen. They're back in the office. Jones is kind of laughing at him and saying, this woman has got you all, discombobulated, basically is what he's laughing at. But then Yen tells him Megan won't be going back to Shanghai, and that freaks Jones out. He's like, Strike's going to come after you. And then Yen throws a newspaper at him and says, guess what? They think she's dead. Then, this is this part. He says, they think she's dead. And then all of a sudden he gets this look in his eye and he starts touching his face. He says, I think I'll shave. And it's this very lustful look in his eye. He's like, I think I'll shave. And it's just so significant, the things that he says. It's a very common thing. I think I'll shave. You can tell just by his face that that's not exactly the meaning of this. There's like a seduction plan or,
Yeah. And the start of that whole scene, it made me think of Jones's perspective. There was like two guys in middle school, like they were little boys, like, ooh, you like that girl. and then rather than be embarrassed, he's just like, oh yeah, I guess I'll shave because I'm a man, you know? So of course he likes the lady. I thought that was his point. And like you said too, it's interesting that there's also that sort of seductive.
Yeah. My impression was he was going to shave because he was going to plan to go seduce her. But Jones says, I don't interfere with you normally, but this is a white woman. And Yen says, that's all right. I have no prejudice against color, which I thought was really good.
That was,
Yeah.
I think I laughed out loud at that because again, like showing the point, what is wrong with everybody here?
No, that was a great line. And then Jones says his catchphrase, this is his catchphrase, no skin off my nose, says that several times in the film. And then another fade to black. And then here the men come marching. They're marching down the hallway, and you get that men marching sound very strong. And they do this a couple times in the film. Mei Lee's going to knock on the door. Megan tells her to come in, and she says, for the third time, I will not have dinner with General Yen. She's third and last time. And she asks Mei Lee, did she send that note to Dr. Strike? And Mei Lee, oh, yes. And she says, well, can you send another note? And then she gives Mei Lee her ring. She said, will this get it sent? And Mei Lee's like, oh, sure, I'll send it. And then there's a film dissolve, and you go to Mei Lee's going to General Yen and tells him Megan said no. And then she gives the note to Dr. Strike to General Yen, and he motions for her, and she puts it in a drawer with the other letters. So obviously her letters are not going to Dr. Strike. Surprise, surprise. And then there's a cross cut to Megan back in the room. And this is when there's a little party going on outside. You'll hear some music in this one, I think, more Asian music in this particular scene, where the women are coming in this tank for some reason. Women are just driven up in a tank, and all these soldiers are there. Like, what is happening? Where did they get to? This is kind of disturbing. But anyhow, everybody seems happy, and the men are getting together with women. They're out there kissing, and she's sort of watching, again, this voyeuristic thing, watching people having these romances. She does this a lot. And then she falls asleep, and then this is when she has her sexy dream sequence where, well, first of all, there's this inhuman looking, but he also looks Asian, this inhuman Asian person. It almost looks like a cross between an Asian person and the devil. That's what this creature looks like.
That's probably what they were going for.
Yeah, this creature is banging down the door as if there's some significance to this, that the devil bad creature is reminiscent of the Chinese people. He comes into the door, he breaks down the door, he attacks her, and in through the window comes this man dressed in white clothing. It looks very similar to the outfit that Dr. Strike wore, so you think it's Dr. Strike. So he jumps in the window, he pushes away the bad inhuman Chinese looking person and gets him off of her. He rescues her, but he's wearing this sort of demi mask over his face. And as she takes down the mask, it's not Dr. Strike, it's General Yen. But yet remember, he's wearing white clothing. He's not wearing his traditional Chinese clothing in this scene. And she kisses him, and then she sort of wakes up. She's a little disturbed. All of a sudden, everybody's gone. There's just this one couple left out there. And she's kind of freaked out from this dream. And she's just sitting there. All of a sudden, General Yen is right there talking to her out of the blue. I'm surprised she didn't jump. But he says he envies the common soldier. And she says, well, a common soldier would have knocked. She's real angry. And he said, well, he did. He almost banged the door down, which is sort of like what was happening in her dream. And then he tells her it's a cherry blossom moon and that the young and old paid homage to the god of love. And she tells him to let her go, begs him to send her back. And he says, well, if anything should happen to you, I'd have to answer to Dr. Strike. And she believes that, I guess. And she asks how long and says, oh, I don't know, but I'll do everything in my power to make your visit very pleasant. And then she says, you ruthlessly slaughter prisoners, and then you show a reverence to the beauty of the moon. See, this is what you were talking about.
Yes, that weird contradiction within him.
And he says there are times he would like to laugh at her, but he also finds her admirable. And then he says, and there are times when, and he's looking at her again in this kind of way. And he says, well, he doesn't want to speak of it. He says, she probably thinks that we, as in Chinese people, are incapable of feeling love. They're not capable of having these feelings. And then he tells her about Chinese poetry and art and love. And you can tell she's very uncomfortable. And then he again asks her, he tells her dinner's at 8. And then, this is an interesting part, there's a man whistling in the garden, and the balconies are kind of adjoined, and out of the other room comes Mei Lee, and there's the man in the garden. He has this handkerchief. He knots it up. He kisses it. He throws it up to her. She takes off her shoe and she throws it down to him and he kisses the shoe and runs away. And at first you just think, oh, they're lovers, right? That's your first thought. You're like, oh, look, they're lovers, and they can't be together because Ma Li is a concubine or whatever. So that's kind of what you think. And Ma Li looks over and she sees that Megan has witnessed this. Again, Megan witnessing lovers. This happens throughout the film.
Just watching.
Yeah, she's just voyeuristic the whole time. And then she tries to give Megan a bracelet. She's kind of trying to bribe her, like, don't tell General Yen. And she said, oh, I'm not going to tell him anyway. And Ma Li tells her that's Captain Lee. And then she says, I wouldn't tell the general. But she says, can you help me get the general to send me back? And Ma Li says, yeah, there's nothing I can do. And she's like, maybe you should meet Mr. Jones, and maybe you could do something with Mr. Jones. And she says, she finds out he's an American. She's like, I want to meet him. She said, well, come to dinner. So Megan's like, well, I don't know about my dress. Is it okay? And then Ma Li sends for this bath and all these fancy new Chinese dresses and tells her, maybe you should put on makeup, basically. And then I said, this is definitely pre-code. They have Barbara Stanwyck in lingerie. They show almost her entire leg. Would not have been acceptable in 1940. So this is very pre-code. And then you see her, she gets all dressed up in this Chinese dress, puts all this makeup on, and she's looking in a mirror at herself. And then all of a sudden, she gets that flashback of that dream of of General Yan.
It's funny you said doctor, because for some reason this entire movie, part of me wanted to refer to him as Dr. Yan, and I don't know why. Yeah, it just feels right for some reason. But you were saying.
Yeah, and all of a sudden when she thinks about this dream, she gets really disgusted. She takes off her makeup. She puts back on her regular dress. But then she comes in, and General Yan's really happy to see her. He introduces her to Mr. Jones and Captain Lee. Jones mentions, he does a toast to Mrs. Yan, which is just, he toasts to an empty chair and says to Mrs. Yan, and the general says, that chair is for my wife who does not exist yet. And then Jones tells, by the way, Ma Li's not his wife, and she's not even allowed to sit at the same level as us. She's in a lower level. And the statements he's making throughout this entire scene are so good. There's so much meaning in everything he's saying. Everything he's saying has a wealth of meaning. It's really interesting, his dialogue in here, this really clever dialogue. He says, she's sitting there. She might look lonely sitting there all alone, but yet I've seen her with plenty of company. And then he looks over at Captain Lee. And Megan at this point is not picking up on this at all. Everybody else at the table is picking up on this, but not Megan. So she's just trying to make regular conversation. She's like, good. I'm so glad there's an American here. I'm so relieved to find another American. And Jones says, I'm a renegade. I'm no relief to anybody. But again, so interesting. And then he talks about how he's helping the general with money. He talks about his boxcar of money, and he's looking at Ma Li when he says that. And he says, but Ma Li already knows about that, and then the general's like, I thought we weren't supposed to talk about this. And he says, Ma Li already knows. And the general said, I haven't told her. And he says, you're not the only man that tells her things. And he looks at Captain Lee.
Yep.
And it's like he's telling the general things. He's dropping hints for the general, and the general is picking all these hints up. He knows exactly now what he's talking about, because then they go to a film dissolve where they're playing cards. Megan says she has no money. She wants to watch. And Jones says, the general tells me everything. And if he didn't, I'd just give $50 to his bodyguard and I'd find it all out. And you can see that General Yan is getting bothered by this, but he doesn't, like I said, he never really reacts much.
No.
And he says, you paid too much. And he says, you just pay $500 to Captain Lee and you can get the lowdown on anything here. And General says, how does Captain Lee know? And Jones says, you better ask Captain Lee. And then General Yan just stares at Ma Li. I said, this is the first time he looks very angry. And he's just staring at her in this really horrible fashion. And she's kind of looking down. Megan, again, she still doesn't really know what's going on, but she feels like something is awkward. So she makes this comment, how pretty are your rings? And then General Yan just takes these rings off and says, there you go, they're yours. And throws them on the table and gives them to Megan. And she said, I don't want them. And Ma Li says, no, please take them. And then Ma Li leaves the room, and Megan starts yelling at them again. She totally doesn't know what's going on. She's like, why are you humiliating her? And Jones says all these things. He's like, Ma Li is a nice girl raised in a mission school, so I've heard. And it's just the way he says everything. He obviously means the total opposite of what he's saying. And then there's some secretive words between the general and Jones, but we sort of get the idea that Ma Li and Captain Lee are That's the end of them. And then the last thing Jones says is, don't forget your rings, Miss Davis. And there's so much meaning to everything he says that is more than what he's just saying.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
That's why I said his dialogue is the most interesting to me in the film.
Yeah, and it also reveals he's just a pretty crappy guy.
But is he really, though? Because what he's doing is telling General Yan what's going on.
Yeah, no,
it's trying to help General. I mean, he's doing it in a not very nice fashion.
Yeah, I think it's just the delivery is what's the issue because he was embarrassing Molly essentially, and then confusing Megan. She didn't know what the heck was going on.
Yeah, I mean, it was confusing to
but
Megan.
He was, from his perspective, he was doing the right thing because remember, this is like his business partner.
Yeah,
and somebody
he's trying to protect. Yeah,
if somebody
it's
is
not that
leaking.
He's not trying to really protect General Yen per se. What he's trying to protect is the money.
The investment. Yeah, General Yen is his investment. So he is doing what a business person would do. So yeah, there is that ruthless nature. And like I said, how, the West might have viewed it, a capitalistic American at the time.
Yeah. And then Megan asked, how can General Yen employ Mr. Jones? And Yen says he's reliable. He won't betray him because his interests are the same as my interest. And he said, not like Mr. Strike. He's unreliable as a lover and a friend. He said, he will betray you for God every time. And yeah. Yeah,
I thought that was significant because there's the double meaning of interest, like interest financial is what I thought, but also like interest, we work together. And then, about betraying you for God, again, showing that there's good intentions, but they're ill-placed. You want to leave your wife to go help some orphans? Yeah, that's awesome to help the orphans, but dude, you got to prioritize,
Charity starts at home.
I was literally going to say something like that. Yeah, and they missed that. So I thought that was a really good line right there as well.
Yeah, he has some great lines. And then Megan says men rarely deviate from their passion in life. She's also saying that to him, like, hey, you're no better in a way. And then she says, Bob Strike is everything she could ever want in a man. She throws down the rings and then she storms out of the room. Very, very dramatic. And Yen picks up the handkerchief. That's what I'm saying. This handkerchief is a reoccurring thing. He picks up her handkerchief. She must have left the handkerchief on the table. And then again, Megan is also in lingerie again. This is the second scene where Megan's in lingerie. A lady comes in and she puts down the handkerchief with the jewelry on the table. And Megan goes and takes it right to Mali. And Mali says, can you please send the rings to my parents? They're poor. And Megan says, well, why don't you take them? Megan is still clueless as to what's going on.
Yeah.
And finally, after a while, Megan finally figures out after some very strong hints from Mali that she is going to be killed by the general. And Megan, she wants to help. She's like, I'm going to go see the general. And she goes, she's still wearing a lingerie. She just throws a robe over the lingerie. She goes running down the hallway. And who's there but Jones? He grabs her up. He's like, hey, I know what you're planning to do. He said, you keep out of it. And he's trying to tell her what's really going on. And she just will not listen to what's going on. She thinks she knows best. Again, this is this thing you're saying. The missionaries, they think they know what's the best way to do things, and they really don't have any concept of what's really happening here. And she has no idea what the real thing is that's happening. And he realizes she's not listening to what he's saying about going in, so he tries this new idea. He said, hey, you shouldn't go in that getup. You better be careful going in that getup. He says, the general is well educated with good manners, but he's still a Chinaman. So
he could have just said a man because that's what it was implying. The lust, but no, he had to throw that in
but
again.
That's the perception.
Yeah,
and as another word, still a savage underneath.
Still a savage. Yep.
Megan says she'll do what she wants. She goes into the room, and then Jones says, no skin off my nose.
Yep, his catchphrase.
Loves that thing. General Yen's very happy to see her. He's always wearing these beautiful garments. Looks like very authentic Chinese garments to me. She accuses him of ordering Mali murdered, and he says, I suggest we talk about something a little more pleasant. Like, let's not talk about the murder of Mali.
Talk about my portrait.
First he starts talking about the port. He's like,
yes.
Yeah. He's like, he wants to offer her this port. He's like, here's some 109-year-old port or something like that. And then he tells Megan, hey, she's been betraying military secrets to his enemies. I don't think Megan understands the danger of it. And she seems to think it to be inconsequential. Well, why don't you give her another chance? There must be some other way to do things. How else can you silence her? And he says, well, in the old days we cut out her tongue, but since you missionaries have taught her to read and write, we can't do that now. We have to basically kill her completely. And he tells her the story about Captain Lee, about how Captain Lee is the son of a very powerful family which claims to support him. But he said to make sure of their support, he took Captain Lee as a hostage. So he can be certain that they do actually support him because he has their son. He says, that's how we get loyalty in China. And keeps asking, why are you interested in Mali? And she says, well, I'm interested in you too, which I think she sort of just said as like a one-off. I don't think she was really thinking about what she was saying, but you see he actually gets taken aback. It's one of the few times in the film where he actually reacts to something unguarded, but then right away he's right back into his manner thing. I'm very flattered. It's interesting. So Megan starts pleading for Mali. She wants him to forgive her. She says to give love without merit, without any thought of its being returned, no thought of gratitude. It's a privilege. It's God's privilege, and now it's your privilege. And then asks how he can be so wise but so blind to spiritual greatness. But what, of course, she means is her own spiritual views. And she says, please do it for me. She starts to cry, and he tries to give her his handkerchief. And she says, I have one of my own. And she pulls out her sleeve, and then it reminds her of the first time they met. And he says, I don't believe you, but when you say these things, I forget that I am General Yen. He asks, why does she care so much for Mali? She acts like Mali is her own flesh and blood. Megan says quickly, yes, we are all of one flesh and blood. And he says, do you really mean that? And he touches her hand. And what does she do? She takes her hand away. And then he says, hey, these are just words you're saying. You don't even, you don't even mean what you're saying. And he says, what sacrifice will you give to help save Mali? And she said, well, what do you mean a sacrifice? And he said, well, you're saying all these words. Why don't you put your money where your mouth is? He doesn't say that, but have your action match your words. And he said, this is why I despise missionaries. And then so she gets angry and says, I will be a hostage for Mei Li. Yeah, I'll do that. And I'll answer for her loyalty. And then he gives this little sly smile. You see this little sly smile. He's winning all these battles with her, and she doesn't even know he is. He's pretty much putting her where he wants her to be with his manipulating her, basically.
Yeah, he wants her to think that she's willingly choosing all these things.
But he's putting her there.
Yeah, he's only
and she
given her...
She doesn't realize that he's doing this.
He's given her one path. It's just like a straight shot. And she thinks she's choosing her own path because, again, she still doesn't understand. He literally, like you just said, spelled it out. Do you really believe these things?
Yeah.
You're just saying words. She has no idea what she actually believes or who she is. And he's trying to show her that and trying to say, what's so wrong about us being together? You know you want it, and I know I want it. The difference is I'm willing to say that, and you aren't willing to say it.
Yeah, you're afraid. Yeah, but it's very interesting. So he's put her in this corner, and she's challenged, and she thinks she's making her decision. Yep. In the next scene, the general and Jones are in the room, and Mali comes in, and general tells her she will live, and she tries to kneel down, grab his hand, and he despises her. He just flings her off, and he says, it's because of her. Go show your gratitude to her. And Mali runs over to Megan. I won't betray you. And Jones is like, hey, what are you up to? And he says, I'm going to convert a missionary. Which, again, interesting.
Juxtaposition of what you would expect.
The opposite, yes, exactly. And then there's this scene outside where, God, Megan is so stupid, it drives me crazy. So there's a scene outside. Megan comes walking over to Mali with the slipper. Here you go, Mali. Here's a slipper for you. And she takes this paper out of the slipper, and she says, oh, it's a prayer I wrote to be sang in the temple. And Megan's like, oh, okay, no problem. Yeah. Oh, my God. And it's so annoying.
Again, it's an example of
the cluelessness.
She was blinded by faith in this point. Yep. Faith is great. However, in this particular situation, she was so blind. Oh, she's so good. And it wasn't that it was faith was the issue. Is Megan thought she was a good influence. So she was really blinded by her own ego. Like, I'm doing such good work here that she didn't stop to put two and two together.
Yeah. And also that Mali was raised in a missionary school. So Mali must be good.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Whereas General Yen was not raised in a missionary school, so he must be bad. But you can clearly see in this film who is the bad one and who is the good one. Although I don't think we could say General Yen is good per se. But comparatively, Mali is pretty bad.
Yeah.
So they go to the temple, and as soon as they come in, the priest sort of chased, I don't know, it's probably not a priest, but whoever the spiritual guy is, chases the other people away right away, and he starts singing this prayer that Mali wrote, and then you see these men behind the wall taking down information, and Mali looks in and she smiles this very evil smile at them, and you know that she's giving them information.
Yeah, you see what's happening.
Yeah. And then the next scene is at the train, the money train. We're at the boxcar, the money boxcar. And Jones, he says he can't sleep. He has a hunch something is wrong. He says he wants to get the money train out of there right now. He's like very, very upset and worried. And he says, take the train away, take the train away. And then all of a sudden they all stop because they hear a noise and there's another train. And Jones says, hey, no other train is due here now. And you're like, oh no. And then the other train pulls up and the soldiers are all on guard, but then the driver waves hi and they're like, oh, okay, it's a friendly driver. It must be okay. Duh. And then as soon as they
train.
it's a friendly train. The driver seems nice.
Yeah.
Should be good. And then they all put their weapons down and right away the other train opens all its doors. They start firing. They start killing the soldiers on the money train. They run over to the money train. They take it over. They take all the money and they drive off. The friendly driver comes over to the other train and he drives that train away. Then the last thing you see is Jones. He's the only one left. He must have gone and hid or something. He comes back and he's just like, oh no, you see this despair.
Yeah.
But then you get your men marching again. This time it's General Yen and Jones and a bunch of soldiers. You hear the marching noises and Jones is really mad. He said, oh, well, Mali's gone. And he gives them this paper. He said, hey, here's a paper that we found. It has every possible bit of information about this boxcar, whatever. And he said, here's all the information. He said, well, where did you get this? He said, how I get everything. I paid for it. And then Megan comes in and Jones is asking her, where's Mali? Where's Mali? And she skipped out and Megan's like, oh, is she not in her room?
Yeah, she still is so clueless. She just doesn't know.
And then Jones is like, have you seen this paper? And she goes, oh, yes, it looks like a prayer Mali had read at the temple. And Jones, I feel like his head's ready to explode.
So, and this was interesting too, because this shows that Jones actually could read Chinese. So again, the racketeer, the renegade, took the time to learn the language and the culture. And he's, quote, doing bad things, making money. But then the Christian missionaries didn't. And I thought that was, again, an interesting juxtaposition of the guy you think is there to do bad actually has some respect for the culture. And the people that you think are there to do good clearly don't respect the culture.
Right. And so as soon as she says that about the prayer, Jones starts flipping out. He said, this isn't a prayer. This is information about General Yen. And how did Mali get it? How did Mali get this information? And then Megan says, oh, well, maybe it was in the shoe I brought her from Captain Lee. You idiot. Yeah, it's just so frustrating. Yeah. But then the entire time, well, Jones feels like us. He's ready to murder this girl. But General Yen is being very pleasant still about it. Oh,
he's just like,
no worries,
money, whatever.
No big deal, yeah, nothing. And Jones is like doomsday. He thinks this is doomsday, basically. He's like, no troops will stay with General Yen. The money's gone. This is the end of everything. The enemy has taken the money. Everybody will go over to the enemy. Yen will have no more empire. He's like Debbie Downer, really bad here. And Yen tells Megan, oh, you can go ahead and go. It's fine. And then even when they're alone, General Yen's not upset. He says, the conquest of a province or the conquest of a woman, what's the difference?
Yeah, that's another line that really stuck out to me. And it just, again, shows just how in control and just laid back he is. He's just like, potatoes.
Like, this is all worth it to get Megan. I mean, that's the impression he gives.
Yeah, he's just like, money I can get more of, women could get more of, but there's only one of you is kind of what he was saying without saying it. Yeah,
I mean, that's the impression you get. And then the thing I thought was the best part of the funniest thing in the whole thing is that how often do you see General Yen literally laughing? Very little, but he starts laughing here and he says to Jones, we finally got some skin off your nose. And I thought that was just such a great line again. I was like,
that is funny, yeah.
And he's just, I said, oddly agreeable after this misfortune. So maybe he himself has not really recognized the extent.
I think he did. I just think that it freed him because he was sort of burdened by his power. Remember,
Jones was going to say that in that scene, actually.
I would argue that Yen is very honorable. He definitely has a perverse and twisted sense of honor. I mean, being that he does kill people, but there is still this sense of pride and honor. And I think that now that the burden of being this warlord general is removed from him because he's essentially lost, it freed him.
Yeah, remember he said he envied the commune soldier.
Yeah, exactly, because he didn't have that freedom. That he doesn't have a wife.
Yeah,
because there's such high expectations. No woman is good enough for general.
Yeah, but
maybe a woman is good enough for just him, being himself.
Yeah, and then it's going to cut to Megan. She's in a room smoking. Jones comes in. He tells her basically, hey, you just screwed everything up for General Yen. And she does at this point seem upset. He said, I hate you, but we're Americans and we should stick together. He said the army's deserting General Yen. I assume a period of time has elapsed since the last conversation to this conversation, because now I think that at this point some of the army has left, or all of the army has left. So I think we've missed a little period of time. I was
wondering that too. That's a good point, because I was like, holy cow, like that escalated
very fast.
very quickly.
Within a minute.
Yeah, just everybody's gone. Yeah, so that would make sense, like, 3 or 4 days passed or something.
I think some time passed. Yeah. And then Megan is very upset. Jones says he'll get her out of here. He tells her to get ready to leave. And then all of a sudden there's a note that comes in from General Yen asking Megan to come. And Jones says, no, she won't see him. Tell General Yen no. And then Megan gets up. She's going to go see him anyway. And he said, hey, you don't have to go see him. And she still goes in. And as soon as she walks in the room, General Yen says, your sportsmanship is magnificent. And I thought that was interesting that he said that as well. And then now he's talking about his portrait. He's asking her about the portrait. He's putting on music. They start playing some music here.
Yeah, the mood music is what I thought. I was
Asks
like, okay.
If she wants some champagne. Yep. He's talking about all these random things. She's not responding. She's just sitting there with this sort of martyred look on her face, to be honest. And then he asks her, I can't. He asks her if, I can't even say it. He asks her if she wants to see his collection of swords in his bedroom.
Yeah.
I was like,
look.
What?
Hey, that's
what a line.
Would
you like to come in my bedroom and see my collection of swords?
That's how you get the ladies. You show off your collection.
I have a very large sword in my bedroom. Would you like to see it?
Want to come see? But she's so clueless. She doesn't get the innuendo.
And she starts, at this point, she starts to cry and scream, why are you torturing me? She's crying, and he says, I think you misunderstood the purpose for sending for you. He said, did you think it was a conventional thing? That is what the words he used. I thought that was interesting. And what we think he meant is, do you think that I brought you here to seduce you? Which is what we all thought, actually. So not just Megan. We all thought that. And then he gets mad. He said, do you think General Yen could accept anything that the heart does not freely give? He said, basically, you've been here this whole time. At any time, if I wanted to rape you, I could have. And he doesn't say rape, of course, but that's the impression he gives. And then he said, you put your life up as a forfeit. And then she's shocked. Like, what's going on? And he's like, basically telling her, you're dead. I mean, you said your life for Mali and she didn't. Yep. So now your life has to, I don't think that ever occurred to her.
Nope.
He said, you're as afraid of death as you are of life. And then I've noticed this music that he put on is not the Asian theme music. It's more a classical romance music, classical music.
It was
interesting. He's putting
music,
more not Asian music on.
Yeah.
More European type
Something
music.
Something that she would have perhaps known.
Yeah. And then he says, you want me to send you back to Dr. Strike. This is the man you want. He's saying you want to laugh at me because you convinced me to hope, and you want to sit there and laugh at me for hoping. And he tells her, yeah, go back to Dr. Strike. Go ahead, go back to him. And he said, real torture is to be despised by someone you love. Bargain or no bargain. Province or no province. Do you know what I expected to do tonight? I was going to come to your room to kill you, and then I was going to follow you into some celestial garden where there's no General Yen, no Megan Davis, just you and I. And I thought that speech was, I don't know. I thought that speech was really something, because as he's saying this is the first time you see him kind of almost lose control. He gets very passionate. He embraces her. And as he's telling her this, you just see a close up of Barbara Stanwyck's face, and these tears are just pouring down her cheeks. It's really, really romantic. Really, it's just a really impactful scene.
Yeah. I mean, he was saying, if I can't have you in this life, perhaps then I can have you in the next.
Let's go somewhere where we can be together, just two beings.
Yeah.
Not you, me, but two beings, two souls, two soulmates. That's what it comes to. And then she rushes out of the room. He gives this beautiful speech and she runs out of the room. Maybe because he mentioned he was going to kill her, perhaps. But then he rings the bell and nobody comes. All the servants are gone. And there's this sudden realization that everybody's gone. And then that's all we can say. And we came very close to the end here.
Yeah.
But we don't want to give away exactly what happens at the end.
For the last scene.
But it's a very good ending, except for the very end part where they have to have this dialogue unnecessarily that I hate when they do this. I complained about this in another podcast about how you have this very impactful ending and you could just end it right there.
Yep.
You don't need recap information in the form of dialogue by other characters in the film. That drives me crazy. And they do that here too. And I think it's so unnecessary.
Yeah, the wrap-up dialogue is... Yeah,
we don't need it.
No, it's oftentimes they should just cut it in
it.
a moment of
Right.
passion where you're emotional and you're stunned, because then it sticks with you.
Yes, exactly.
And you leave the theater thinking about it.
Right.
But yeah, sometimes they would just be like, let's wrap it all up. And
yeah, they did that in White Heat too, and it made me so angry the way they closed out White Heat. That was the one I was complaining about. The way they closed out White Heat, they could have just taken that last little bit out, and God, it would have been the most interesting ending.
yeah, because I appreciate open-ended movies sometimes where it's just like, oh, that's it? Okay.
Yeah.
Because guess what? It sticks with you.
Yeah, like the Bedford incident. That has a great ending. That's exactly the way a film should end.
Yeah, or what the heck? There's the one of the heist movies. It ends with there's some people that are on a bus on a bridge that's kind of, it looks like the bus might fall off the bridge. You don't know, and that's just how the movie ends.
Yeah.
Just like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so you don't know, but it leaves you thinking, oh my gosh, are they gonna make it? You don't know.
Yeah, so, well, that was a lot. I'm sure we're running quite long on time because that was a lot. We really went through this film with a fine-tooth comb. So you have any thoughts?
I think that, it's just a very interesting historical piece. You have to go into it realizing that whitewashing occurred, very unfortunately, very blatant racist interpretations of Asian culture. It was almost like people were trying to honor them, but again, very much like the missionaries who were utterly kind of clueless, the filmmakers also had that same sort of sense of cluelessness. However, beautifully shot, the acting very naturalistic and just real, very good dialogue. It did not feel scripted. It just felt like it was people having actual conversations. Many blink and you'll miss it, things going on in the chaotic streets. You really have to listen to dialogue because a lot of stuff does have that double meaning. And just, you want to look in the backgrounds of the scenes too, or even like, for instance, with the handkerchief, like I missed, because there's so much going on. I missed that he didn't accept it. There's significant little things throughout the entire film that you should really watch for. I think overall the film is greatly underappreciated. The fact that it had no Oscar nominations is pretty mind-blowing, because I completely agree with you. The sets and costumes, phenomenal. Overall direction, very good. But yeah, it's something worth watching if you view it as sort of a living historical piece. Like you said, almost like a newsreel. If you look at it like that, you can learn from it and ideally grow from it, because again, I would say the moral of the story is we're all human beings. There is no East versus West. Let's find our common humanity and work on building that rather than tearing each other apart, or rather than saying, I'm holier than thou. You should never do that if you truly want to help somebody. Yeah.
So what would you rate? This is a hard one to rate. What would you rate this?
It is hard. I would think, and we're going off of 4 stars, right?
5.
5? Okay. I would give it a 4, I think, because as you can tell, there's a lot to unpack. When you really start to think about this film, I think it is very well done, and I see it as a work of art. And the work of history as well, much as I just said. It's definitely not perfect. I think, unfortunately, part of it, the casting was definitely an issue. There's also not a whole lot that really happens. I mean, the movie, obviously we might have these time jumps of people are knocked out, or like we said, towards the end. But the movie only really takes place over the course of a few days. Yeah. And there's no big significant event. There's no action. There's no explosions or anything. It's really just a drama, a romance. And it's a sort of will they, won't they, type of situation that you're teetering back and forth the entire time. So much of the story is through the dialogue, which I like. So I would give it a 4.
Yeah, I will actually also give it a 4. I mean, I have to deduct. Normally when a film has all the aspects of I like, such as great cinematography, great editing, great acting, great screenplay, great directing, when it has all the big five, great score, and great score because there was no score, because they used the sounds. When I get all 6 of those on board, I usually will give it very close to a 5, but because of the definite sort of racism in this film being not a film that we would make today, certainly. No. This is not a film that would be made today. I do believe that he was trying to not be racist. I don't know, not be racist, but he was trying to get across your point of we're all equal.
Yeah.
Chinese people are not lesser. But the way it was done throughout the thing, unfortunately, there was a lot of statements and language that even though you're trying to show somebody's attitude at the time and show what is the wrong attitude, it's still nevertheless, it can be offensive in the actual film, even if you're trying to convey the proper idea.
Yeah, it's sort of like Huckleberry Finn with Mark Twain. Obviously, he was showcasing racism and the South in America. But also, when you take a step back, there are racist moments in that work that can be upsetting and offensive towards people. So I agree. I think it was well intended for the time. You can see how kind of groundbreaking it was to the point where it got banned by some places. But from the modern lens, you also have to say, well, although it was well-intended, intentions can only go so far. So even if he was trying to show the fault in racism, it ultimately became racist itself.
Yeah, and especially, like we said, not using Asian for an Asian character, which is highly common at the time. I mean, we were actually lucky that the actress that played Ma Li was an Asian.
I was surprised.
I mean, that was lucky.
Yeah,
and I think most of the other characters or actors in the film were actually Asian. The only person who was supposed to be an Asian that wasn't an Asian was Niles Astor, I believe, because all the other actors or extras or character actors all seemed to be Asian.
And that made it even weirder for me because I was like, well, so how much of more of a leap would it have been to have your leading man actually be Asian than to have, everybody else actually be
they
Asian?
did have Japanese film stars at this time.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in 1933. I mean, you had, I can never say his name, but the Kurosawa actor, Seisui, whatever his name is. Anyhow, he was this great Japanese silent film star. Now, I do think he couldn't speak English, so that would have been problematic.
Yeah, but but neither could Niles. I believe he had to learn.
No, he could speak English. He just had an accent.
So that might have been part of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, just unfortunately, that's why we can't give it the 5.
Right.
Otherwise, it definitely an underappreciated movie that you should go into knowing that there is whitewashing, that there is very racist remarks, but you can still appreciate it as a work of art.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so check out what the heck is his name? The bitter tea of General Yen.
Not Dr. Yen.
Yeah, not General Yen. The bitter tea of General Yen. You can actually find this, as we have found out, on Tubi. Is that
Tubi.
You can stream it on Tubi. It is otherwise very hard to find, but you can stream it on Tubi. It's not going to be your highest quality thing. It's not high definition or anything. I don't believe this has ever had a restoration. I don't think this is in 4K anywhere. So
no re-releases.
But it's going to really still help in that sort of newsreel documentary feel to the film. So that in that way, it is kind of cool. But check it out, and thank you again, Ed, for being my guest.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always happy to be here.
Yeah, you're a great guest. And for Silver Screen Time Machine, Wendy's Classic Film Review, this is Wendy saying goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast today. Please don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. And please leave us a comment or a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Intro and outro music composed by Heidi Engel. Artwork by Tyler Birch. Produced and edited by Wendy Whittick. Recorded at PCTV Studios, Pittsburgh, PA. See you next time.